Hi everyone, it's Doris the Coder, and welcome or welcome back, old and new friends. Today's video is going to help you with some resources. So this is not a coding video, full disclaimer, right? It will help you whether you are a coder or an auditor, but largely you're coders. The purpose of this video is to give you resources to help you with two things you will be unable to dodge if you are a coder: the expectation for production and the expectation for quality. Now, in my heart, I would hope quality would go before production, but I've worked in coding environments, and sometimes the squeaky wheel is production, and if your quality is bad, they usually learn a little bit later that your quality is bad. They know a lot more real time if your production isn't where. So the purpose of this video really is to help you meet those expectations as much as possible. So first I'll start with, and this video is going to give you guidance on 5 areas: diagnoses, procedural, visual, guidelines, and some reference sheets. So I'll start with references, okay? Every year we have for me, both the pleasure and the disadvantage, the advantage and disadvantage of getting new code books. I'm like a kid in the candy store. I love to get my new books. So, but I also get very frustrated because all the notes and tips and things I've put in my book for that calendar year that are still applicable have to be transferred all over to the other book. So, if you are a coder and you're working in a coding position, a prior calendar year book may not really be of value for you, because if you're working in that environment, you're just kind of coding, 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 coding. Once you get your new book, you always code within a certain number of days. Once you get to that current calendar year dates of service, anything after that is off the coding floor and you don't have to deal with it. So you think, well, what do you do with your old books? Recycle, donate them to schools, you can do that. But one thing that I find very helpful is the creation of visual references. And this is something you can do not just with your coding books, although ICD-10, what many folks don't realize is in the rear of your ICD-10 book, you have some really great visuals. Now, I have the AMA book, but I've bought Ingenix, Optum, AMA, different resources. I think I have the AAPC book for a while, and all of those have some pretty good visual references in it. Well, I'm pretty particular about my books, and when I audit, I don't know what year I would be auditing because I never know kind of what's coming in the form of an audit. So I'm not brave enough to unbind my book. But if you're a coder who won't come back to it, you might totally unbind your book with this method I'm about to give you. So if it's something that you need visuals for, like if you're coding spinal orthopedics and anatomy, and I just did a shout out video for Shim Spine on that, right? And you need to kind of see the anatomy and lay it out when you code it. You might want an easily accessible visual reference for you. Now, I am a book person. I started with the books, and I don't see myself abandoning my books anytime soon. I have this handy book stand, FYI, if you're interested. This is on Etsy, on SKD Laser. If I can find it, I'll link it in the video. SKD Laser is where I got this book stand from. So I use this at home, and that's good for ergonomics, but it only fits 2 books, and sometimes I'm using more than 2 books. I also don't try to pack this and take this with me or disassemble and reassemble it. So this only stays home. This doesn't help me when I travel. But you are lifting books all day likely. Well, these books are not light, okay? And this is my CPT book, the 2021, but this is my CPT book. They're not light, and if you lift these enough, you can find yourself really with neck pain, shoulder pain, and ergonomic injury. So not only will this help you with quality and production, but it's also a really good ergonomic, and you'll find economic tip as well. I have some additional books that I use. This is one of my favorite publishers for IR, Dr. Zilski. He is a physician that is also a coder, so I think he brings some kind of unique value in that regard. This is also a very thick book. It's almost as thick as an ICD. So what do I do at the end of the year when the book is over? I've now paid for this book, and this book is kind of no value. Well, not exactly. Remember, anatomy doesn't change, but codes do. So maybe some of the codes in this book are still valid. Maybe some of them aren't, but the anatomy is still going to be the same, and the kind of procedures you do from one calendar year to another can also be the same. So at the end of the year, especially if you don't want to totally dismantle your book, but you just want some visuals, you can actually take some of those visuals. And here I sacrificed my Z Health book from 2014 and I ripped out the page. Now, you don't break any rules by doing this because I own the book, right? So I'm not copying this, but I cut the page out, and his books are bound, they bind them a little bit differently, so they're harder to cut. But you just put something down it, straight razor. I didn't do it on this, so it's not a perfect ridge, but I took it to Kinko's, $2.25. I have a visual reference. This helps me because I code pediatric cardiology, and pediatric cardiology is very complex, and it has a lot of different conditions, and that can affect like what you see in your cath reports and what procedures they're doing, and it just helps me. I'm a visual person. I dismantled my book somewhat for the pages that I wanted, and I found this helpful because when I'm going through and I'm trying to figure out, wait, was that a truncus arteriosus or patent ductus arteriosus, and wait, what is that condition when I see it? I have a visual reference here as well as the description of what that is on his book. So take that old book, sacrifice it that way. If you have, you need visual references in your ICD, take your prior calendar year book, and you don't have to dismantle your book. You can just cut out the areas that you no longer need, right? You can take even an old book and not use your books if your company has old books and make those, because again, anatomy doesn't change, codes do. Let's say, for example, though, you can't pay for a book like Z Health. Great publisher, love them. People would think that I work for Dr. Z. I have no affiliation with him whatsoever, but I am a purchaser of his content and I find it helpful. But it is not cheap. So doesn't help you ergonomically. Well, what if you don't, right? So if you code IR, vascular specifically, Appendix L in your CPT book includes some really nice visual references. It's not going to match, like Z Health actually has a color chart, which I use, and this has the codes on it. You see it drawn on, it's laminated already. I didn't have to do that. I use that when I'm coding things like MAPCAs, and I just kind of color the areas that I know were catheterized and then go back through the report and plug in my codes, right? This is very helpful for me, but if you don't want to pay the money for this, CPT has helped us in the form of vascular when they created Appendix L a few years ago. Rip this out of an old book because you may not want to destroy your current book, or cut it out if you want it neat. Get it laminated, and you can write the codes on it. Just remember, tip with IRs, you've got to factor the approach because sometimes the approach will change your code. But if you just want a visual and you want to draw out your catheter path, laminate it. The reason I recommend the lamination is, like I said, I write on this, and when I'm done, I can erase that. All right. I'm not going to erase it because I actually have to code that case, but I can erase it. So I get just a dry erase marker. I like the ones with the erasers on the end, but you don't need to have that. You can use a paper towel and reuse it. When you feel like it gets too dirty or something, spray some glass cleaner, wipe it off. You've got a brand new shiny area, and your image is maintained and intact. Okay, so that'll help you from a visual. So if you want to buy some resources like this, I like it. I love it. I use it. And you can use this resource over and over again visually, even when the codes get outdated. You can not buy it and use what's already in your book by using your ICD, your CPT, same thing. Now, as much as I have advised against it, I found myself being a hypocrite when I get back in the coding piece when it comes to code reference sheets, right? Diagnosis code reference sheets, you use them so often you don't remember the code. You want to write down the things you're seeing over and over again that just haven't stuck yet. Real time, I get that, but the challenge becomes, one, you're writing in whatever order you wrote it down, so then you're trying to scan a piece of paper to find that diagnosis, and sometimes it's just faster to look it up in the book in that regard, right? But again, the lifting and the moving of your books, and those of you working from home that haven't worked from home before, you may even have space issues. Like I have an L-shaped desk, and even I have, I think, space issues when it comes to coding in my in the process of coding. So one of the things I do is I take a common code. A range that I use are in pediatric cardiology, for example. I use a lot of the Q codes because I deal with a lot of congenital. Now, all my cases are congenital, but I use a lot of the Q cardiovascular codes for the heart and great vessel disorders. I will actually take my prior year book and I haven't done it this year, but my 2020 book, first thing I do, and please don't miss this step, is I code all those conditions the next year in my 2021 book. I follow the steps, I follow the index, I go to the tabular, I back up, I make sure there's no notes around it or at the category that apply to it. I make sure my guidelines are current and everything. And if I do that for the year, like I did this year, 2021, and it's fine, then if they're taking me to the same codes and those pages look alike, instead of destroying my 2021 book, I will actually rip the pages out of my 2020 book and make a quick reference sheet for me, because some codes I remember, but the Q codes and the Z codes that I often use, I mix those up a lot. I will just take those pages out, laminated. Now I have a two-sided sheet. And if you're for me, I work from home and being self-employed, I probably work more hours than maybe the average coder does, and I might be snacking at my desk or drinking at my desk. By laminating those sheets, I don't tarnish my books, right? So if I spill something or drop something on it, it's still clean. I can wipe it off because it's laminated. Really good idea for my resources there. Your diagnosis guidelines. Now, you don't actually have to have your diagnosis guide. You do it with your CPT guidelines as well, but you don't have to spend any extra money for your ICD guidelines, because you can get them as a separate attachment. But if you have a book that includes the ICD guidelines, and for example, my Nginx books, they put the guidelines at the beginning of the tabular, but in the guidelines, they also give some examples that I think are helpful. Those examples are not in the official guidelines. They're not part of the official ICD-10 CM guidelines, but if you find them helpful, you might print that out, right? Here's a muscle and tendon table, for example, in my ICD book, right? I might print out the muscle and tendon table so I know what tendons are in the muscles or are in the shoulder versus upper arm versus forearm. That could be a really great reference sheet for you to create. I have a 2021 book, and this table is in the AMA one. It's on page 959 if you have the same book, but if you don't have the same book, then that's not of any value to you. But again, now you've got a diagnosis reference, so procedurally, that could help you with your guidelines and give those extra little pieces like the boxes and scenarios that are not part of your official guidelines. You can have that, but it can also help you for procedurally, because when you code musculoskeletal things like tendons, sometimes you think your index has failed you because you're looking for more specificity in the CPT book than exists in the code set, right? If it's a tendon in the shoulder, if it's an extensor tendon of the shoulder, you probably won't find the anterior deltoid. Oh no, I said extensor, didn't I? You won't find the posterior deltoid tendon repair in CPT. The code doesn't read that, but it would read an extensor tendon in the shoulder. So having this table to kind of know what tendons fall where is a really quick reference for you if you code in that regard. And second to last point is, what if you are a coder who codes in the EMR? I think a lot of the coders coming out now are probably better prepared in some regard because they don't have to unlearn a behavior like coding on paper and using books. They're training specifically on encoders, and I'll hold my opinion on that, but they're used to that, so it's not something they have to learn. This kind of reference is not something everyone can use, so you can't really see this very well, but what this is when I code interventional cardiology, this is only going to work if you have a limited code set. So when I code interventional cardiology, I don't use like the whole book of codes. It's really just cath procedures and angioplasties and whatever interventions that take place in the cath lab for those pediatric I can't say just it's a pediatric, but it's a lot of congenital stuff as well. Well, if you are coding and you work for one of those systems where you can't have your report on paper, which is so hard for me. I like my reports on paper. Specifically when I travel though, I'll take this sheet because I might be in an airport and I can't work there, or I might be working from a hotel and I don't feel comfortable having to secure actual paper reports, right? Because we've got to maintain HIPAA. So I'll keep the records on the system and I'll use this sheet. This sheet has my common codes that I use. And I'll take my code books. Well, this is easier to use. Maybe I'll take my ICD book and not have to take my CPT. This is easier to use as I'm going through the report, right? So instead of me writing and highlighting like I'm used to, as I go through the report, I can say, okay, yeah, we did a right heart cath, we did a left heart cath, we did coronary angiography, we also did pulmonary angiography and supravalvular aortography. And then I can get to my code book if I need to, or even my code lookup system if I'm trying not to necessarily use my book, right as I go. And at the end of my case, I'm just kind of plugging and finding those things to get my codes, right? So something like this reference sheet is helpful for me in that regard. And again, can help me not necessarily have to have my book, because I use these codes often, but the old memory doesn't work as well as I want it to. So I may not remember things as much. Good reference sheet you can kind of create for yourself also. And again, that's free. I created that based on my common codes. I looked them up, and that is helpful for me, even with my laminated sheets. It's easier for me to carry that. Believe it or not, your books have some weight on them. The ICD is somewhere between like 6 and 8 pounds. I know because I've had to check it a few times and take it out of my little rolling bag, just because even pulling it is not great for me. It's not comfortable for your neck. So I've decided I was just going to check it in my bag or put it in my other bag, and it threw my weight over a few times. So I know it weighs somewhere between like 6 and 8 pounds, and that's just that single book. And then finally, those are just some tips to hopefully help you as a coder deal with the areas of your quality and production. Unfortunately, it's not always in that order. Your quality and your production, which are things you will have to overcome when you begin your journey as a coder. Hopefully that helped you. As always, thumbs up if you like the video. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when I post and when I update. If you find the video helpful, share it with someone that you think would also find it beneficial, and feel free to comment, give me feedback. Let me know if there's anything you want to hear about that's in my wheelhouse that I haven't done yet. And I will see you in the next video. So again, thanks for visiting my channel, or thanks for coming back, and I'll see you the next time.